як наші голоси. То ви щасливо тут заїхали, що...
Дякую, дуже добре, в порядку.
Так. То ви були кілька разів, здається, що брати?
Так, я вже був тричі.
Тричі?
Раніше. А вже кілька років тому останній раз.
Mr. Stetsko, can you tell me about where and when you were born?
1912 in Ternopil in the western Ukraine.
And can you tell me something about your parents?
My father was priest and my mother was teacher. And my father died 1923 in Ukraine.
Yes. And what are your earliest childhood memories? Can you tell me something about the school that you went to?
I studied in Ternopil in high school. This is in gymnasium. This is other type of school as is present time in Great Britain. And after in Lviv University, previously in Krakow University, philosophy and law.
When did you first get involved in the Ukrainian liberation movement and why?
I did 16 years. I was a member of the Ukrainian military organization and after the member of Ukrainian Nationalist Youth Organization. And from this time I was without interruption the member of Ukrainian underground revolutionary movement after in organization Ukrainian Nationalist. This organization was created in 1929 and from this time I was the member of this organization as leading member after 2-3 years in Ternopil and after in Lviv and after in several I was traveling to the Western countries to mobilize the Western opinion for Ukraine independence. And I proclaimed the independence of Ukraine in 1941, the 3rd of June.
Can you tell me why you got yourself involved in Ukrainian liberation movement at such a young age?
Because the situation in Ukraine was under the Russian and Polish occupation and other occupants, and our aim was to fight for the renewal of Ukrainian national independence and human liberties. And for our young generation, it was the aim and the purpose of all our life. It was not only my personal convictions, but it was the faith of the whole young generation in this time to continue the liberation fight after the occupation of Ukraine, after the liquidation of Ukrainian independence. We were the generation, this generation believed in the necessity to fight for our dignity, our liberty, our full development of our possibilities of creativity, and to create the possibility for our nations to have the same rights as all other nations of the free world.
Can you tell me something about the events leading up to the renewal of Ukrainian independence and your role as Prime Minister?
It was during the Second World War. We were of the convictions, and it was our intention to use the situation of the war between the Russians and Germans, to use the situation for renewal of Ukrainian state, Ukrainian independent state against both enemies, against Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia, and to create the Ukrainian national independent state in all the ethnographic Ukrainian territories. And in this time, it was great underground, a large underground movement, liberation movement in Ukraine, led by the organization Ukrainian Nationalists, in this time under the leadership of Stefan Bandera. And we organized in Ukraine the insurgent units, underground units, and after these units fought against Russian occupational troops and German occupational troops. And before the Germans conquered the western Ukraine, especially the capital of western Ukraine, Lviv, our insurgent units liberated Lviv before the German troops came. And this time I illegally entered in Ukraine, especially in Lviv, and we have a plan to proclaim the independence of Ukraine in every situation, in every great city. And we used the situation before the German occupied the radio station. We occupied before the Germans, and it was, I convoked the National Assembly, the Revolutionary National Assembly in Lviv 13 June of 41, together with Metropolitan Archbishop of Ukrainian Catholic Church, and in connection with Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Metropolitan Polycarp, and at present Patriarch of Ukrainian Catholic Church, Cardinal Stetsko. We prepared the proclamation. I was the author of the proclamation, and Archbishop Metropolitan Stetsko prepared the pastoral letter, and together with President Cardinal or Patriarch Stetsko, we organized this National Assembly. I was the chairman of the National Assembly. We proclaimed the renewable Ukrainian independence, and against the view and against the view of Nazi Germany. And we created the government. This was the only one democratic, really democratic coalition government in the so-called New Europe, New German Europe. Our government was composed from not only from representatives of organization Ukrainian nationalists, but from national democrats, from socialists, from social revolutionaries, and many others national, not so parties, because the parties were liquidated under the Russian occupation. Not only our organization, Ukrainian Nationalists, was in underground. It was only one organization, but this was some tendencies in the Ukrainian society from previously as National Democratic Party, more on personal level as organization groups. But we took in the government all these most important representatives, including both churches, representatives of both churches, and we prepared the program of our activities. In every city and every village was proclaimed the independence too. And we created at this time the revolutionary parliament, the so-called Council of Seniors, under the honorary presidency of Metropolitan Stetsko, and the chairman was the Dr. Kost-Levitsky, former prime minister of the Ukrainian government in Western Ukraine in 1980 year, and he was the president of this revolutionary parliament, and Metropolitan Stetsko was honorary president, and Patriarch Svipe, this time the Veskov, bishop. He was the honorary member of this counter-revolutionary parliament. And in this parliament were represented all the political tendencies, and our organization was in minority, because our tendency was not to dominate, but to combine all national forces in the fight against Nazi Germany and Russia. After we received the ultimatum of Hitler to revoke the independence of Ukraine, to resign, I received to resign, the ultimatum to resign Prime Minister of Ukraine and dissolve the government, but I refused the ultimatum of Hitler, and I was arrested and imprisoned in concentration camps, Sachsenhausen near Lviv, for 4 years. And all the repressions were without result. 3 members of our government were liquidated by Gestapo. They were murdered by Gestapo. Others were in underground, and many were liquidated by Russians after between the situation of the war between these two powers. This was the situation this time. Why I proclaimed the independence? It was for your question. Because in this time I was the first deputy chairman of the organization Ukrainian Nationalists. The Bandera was leader of the organization. I was the chief of staff, and in this time I was in Ukraine the executive chairman of the organization Ukrainian Nationalists. And it was the situation that we have had the greatest and only one underground organization. We have for our disposition the cadres and the insurgent units, and there was the power. And from this point of view, it was necessary to be active. And another problem was that we were convinced that the German, especially the Hitler government, was against our conception. It was necessary to have the chief of the government, one man who had the courage, to refuse not only the ultimatum, but under the pressure, a danger of the liquidation, not to capitulate. Our leadership was of the opinion that I should be this candidate for the Prime Minister of Ukraine. In this suggestion of the leadership of UN was adopted by National Assembly, Revolutionary National Assembly, with understanding of both Ukrainian churches.
Can you tell me something about the origins of the Anti-Bolshevik Bloc of Nations?
In this time, 1940, we prepared the first manifesto of the organization Ukrainian Nationalists, and this manifesto we emphasized that it's necessary to create the common front of all the subjugated nations against the oppression, against the occupation of Ukraine by all enemies of Ukraine, and by the means of national liberation, insurrections, coordinated and simultaneous of all these subjugated nations, we can we can dissolve the Russian Empire the national independent states and to have the possibility to fight against Nazi Germany. It was the first manifesto in the Western world against totalitarianism, for freedom of men, for freedom of nations, for freedom of speech and so forth, and these basic human liberties. And this manifesto was political was as basis for the creation of Anti-Bolshevik Bloc of Nations. It was 1940, before the war against between Germany and Russia. I would like to underline that in this time it was the revolutionary document to proclaim against the victorious Germany in whole continental Europe this manifesto against totalitarianism, against colonialism of every type and form. This was the political, ideological initiative. This time we prepared, it was created in 1914, the Committee for Common Fight of the Subjugated Nations, and we published the first magazine, Our Front, in many languages of the subjugated nations. And after, in 1943, I was in Nazi concentration camps, but the Bandera was together in the same concentration camp. But the General Taras Czuprinka, the successor of Bandera, and after I was arrested, he organized this common front by the means by primary to convoke this conference of the subjugated nations in the forest of Ukraine in Zhytomyr in November 1943, and it was created the committee of so-called National Committee of the Revolutionary Organizations of the Subjugated Nations. The name of Anti-Bolshevik of Nations this was the basis, organizational basis for the Bolshevik Bloc of Nations. And these insurgent units participated in this conference, the representatives, these insurgent units of many nations, this was 13 nations. And after the great raids of Ukrainian insurgent army to many countries to propagate this common front of the subjugated nations, and in this sense that we were of the opinion that we can't receive the support of the Western powers, because the Western powers were allies of Russian imperialists against Nazi Germany. But our conception was to fight against both enemies, and we, in this time, this conference adopted the proclamation and appeal to the Western powers in this sense that the Western powers should create a common front with the subjugated nations against both, against Nazi Germany and against communist Russia. But this, our appeal was refused. I think it was the greatest mistake of the Western powers, because it was possible in this time to dissolve, to liquidate both enemies of the of freedom and national independence, Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia, together with America, with Great Britain, with France and other allies. But without this our appeal was without result. We fought, Ukrainian insurgent army fought more than 10 years in the 1950s years. In 1947, it was impossible for Russians to be victorious, and the Russians created the alliance between two powers, communist Poland and communist Czechoslovakia, and three armies. This alliance of three armies, or the victorious, so-called victorious, because without support of Great Britain and United States, it was impossible. It would have been possible for Russia to be victorious. But these three powers, it was the plan of Russians, this alliance, to defeat the Ukrainian insurgent army, but they have had only the success that our insurgents go underground, but organize the military raids, military insurgent activities in 1950s in Ukraine and in the raids to other countries. But in 1950s, it was necessary to change the political and military strategy and tactic and to go in underground. And it was not we were not defeated, but we changed the strategy and tactics, and morally and ideopolitically we were victorious, because it was necessary to be victorious against our Ukrainian insurgent army, against Ukrainian nationalists, many than 10 years, but but only 4 years it was necessary to be victorious against the Nazi Germany. It is the very important argument that the ideas are victorious, not only the technology and military technical means. But it was not the end. In the 50s, we organized in concentration camps. These concentration camps were 17 million of prisoners, the greatest majority of political prisoners. We organized strikes, insurrections, and so forth in concentration camps from 1953 to 1959. And it was the great danger for the Russians that these insurrections in concentration camps can be the other focus for the enlargement, this revolutionary insurgent movement in the subjugated nations, in native countries. And in this time was this so-called destabilization of Khrushchev. This real reason was to save the empire and reorganize the concentration camps. One part was released of political prisoners, one part deported to other parts of Siberia, and the reorganization of the concentration camps and this so-called destabilization was the result of these great uprisings. And last remark is that this so-called in the 60s, in the 70s, the young generation was the rebirth of the young generation as continuation. And the 70s is the continuation of the fight organization, Ukrainian nationalists and Ukrainian insurgent army in other forms, but with the same aims, with the same goals, for the same purpose. In other, why so long, this was my explanation, because as a consequence of this explanation is that, in our opinion, the mobilization of the subjugated nations and the coordination of this whole national revolutionary liberation movements of the subjugated nations and the solution from within the Russian Empire and the communist system is only alternative to the atomic war. In my opinion, it is only this alternative to avoid the atomic war and to avoid the World War III, because it is impossible for Russians in the situation of these internal activities in the empire, in activities on the line of the dissolution of this of this multinational empire and these contradictions in the communist system, is impossible to fight against the majority of the nations in the Russian Empire, because we are in the majority, the Russians are in the minority. In connection with satellite countries, the proportion is 2 to 1 in our favor. The same proportion is in the Soviet army. That we are in majority in the Soviet army too, in satellite states including. Satellite states including, this is 2 to 1. And if we can mobilize these subjugated nations in the soldiers of the Soviet army and the soldiers in the satellite states, it is possible with these internal actions on all fields, on all levels of life, to destroy the Russian Empire and the communist system from within, without atomic war. I think we are against atomic war. We were against atomic war every time, because the object of this atomic war will be our country. And but it is impossible for Russians to drop the atomic bomb in our countries. It is impossible to liquidate the national liberation movements and uprisings coordinating with the atomic bomb, because the Russians are have occupation troops. The Russian colonists are in Ukraine, other subjugated nations. They will be suicide the Russians themselves. It is one point very important. I am the conviction that that is the great lies of the Russian propaganda, that the revolutionary movements can provoke the atomic war. On the contrary, can eliminate the atomic war. That is not only my opinion, but also opinion of General Fuller, the greatest military theoretician of the Great Britain, not only Great Britain, but that is the opinion of General Singlaw from the United States, General Graham, and many others American theoreticians. That is one point. Another point, why the Russians are conducting at present time this movement. Why? To disintegrate the Western societies, to demobilize the Western societies. This movement is organized and initiated by the Russians for disintegration of these societies, because they have the fear, not only in connection with atomic war, but in connection with these movements inside of Russian Empire. And this so-called pacifist movement should the Western power understand that is organized, mobilized by the Russians. And yes.
Well, Mr. Stetsko, can you tell me the reason why you've come to Bradford today?
For us, it's very important at present time to have the moral and political support of Western societies. We have the greatest support. In July in Washington, President Reagan said that our aims is our aims is the American aim, with his word, it was your aims are our aims. Your struggle is our struggle. This was the words of President Reagan. And he identified himself with our political conception. It was the great moral support for us. That from Zhytomyr, from this forest from Zhytomyr to Washington was the great way. And why Bradford? I think it is very important this unveiling this stone in the Bradford Cathedral. It is the greatest moral support of the British Church and British people for our liberation struggle, because we are fighting against atheism, we are fighting for basic human rights, we are fighting for God and for fatherland. And this connection of two ideas, faith in God and faith in fatherland, it is the decisive factor for us. And that is symbolic act in Bradford, historical symbolic act, in this sense of moral and ideological support for our fight. And we are very thankful for this initiative. I think this fact, known behind the Iron Curtain, will be very great.